The web browser sitting open on your screen right now is one of the most sensitive pieces of software on your computer. It holds your saved passwords. It maintains active sessions to your email, banking, and social media accounts. It processes payment information. It executes code from thousands of websites you visit, many of which you have never heard of and have no reason to trust. And like all complex software handling untrusted input from the internet, browsers contain vulnerabilities, flaws in code that, if discovered and exploited by attackers, can compromise everything that browser has access to. When security researchers or malicious actors discover a critical browser vulnerability, the clock starts ticking. For responsible researchers, there is a disclosure timeline, typically 90 days, to notify the vendor and allow them to develop and distribute a patch before making the vulnerability public. But for attackers who discover flaws independently, there is no waiting period. They exploit immediately, targeting users who have not updated, creating a narrow window where massive numbers of systems are vulnerable to attack. This scenario is not hypothetical. It plays out repeatedly throughout the year across every major browser, and when it happens, the difference between being compromised and being protected often comes down to a single question. Did you install the update within the critical window before mass exploitation began? Today, we are examining what happens when a browser vulnerability is discovered, how the security community responds, and why the 72-hour period following a critical patch release represents the most dangerous time for users who delay updates. To understand browser vulnerabilities, you must first understand what a vulnerability actually is in technical terms. A vulnerability is a weakness in software that allows an attacker to perform actions that should not be possible within the security model the software was designed to enforce. In the context of web browsers, the security model is fundamentally about isolation. Code and data from different websites should be isolated from each other. Website code should be isolated from the underlying operating system. The browser's own internal processes should be isolated from potentially malicious content they are processing. When these isolation boundaries can be bypassed, a vulnerability exists. Browser vulnerabilities fall into several broad categories, each with different implications for security. Memory corruption vulnerabilities arise from programming errors in languages like C and C++, which most browsers are partially written in because of performance requirements. These languages give programmers direct control over memory allocation and access, which enables efficiency, but also creates opportunities for mistakes. If a program writes data beyond the boundaries of allocated memory, a condition called a buffer overflow, it can overwrite adjacent data in unpredictable ways. Attackers can carefully craft malicious inputs that trigger these overflows in controlled ways, allowing them to inject and execute arbitrary code with the privileges of the browser process. This type of vulnerability is particularly dangerous because successful exploitation can lead to complete system compromise. Logic vulnerabilities stem from flaws in how browsers implement web standards and security policies. The same origin policy, which prevents JavaScript code from one website from accessing data from another website, is foundational to web security. But the policy has numerous edge cases and exceptions that must be implemented correctly. If a browser incorrectly implements same origin checks, attackers can craft websites that read data from other sites the user is logged into, potentially stealing sensitive information like emails, private messages, or financial data. Cross-site scripting, or XSS, vulnerabilities allow attackers to inject malicious scripts into legitimate websites through input fields, cookies, or other data channels that the browser incorrectly treats as trusted. These injected scripts execute with the privileges of the legitimate site, allowing them to steal session tokens, modify page content, or perform actions as the authenticated user. Use-after-free vulnerabilities are a particularly dangerous class of memory errors where the browser frees allocated memory but retains a pointer to that memory location. If the browser later attempts to use that pointer, it accesses memory that may now contain different data or be controlled by an attacker who has allocated new data in that location. Exploiting use after free bugs requires sophisticated techniques, but can lead to arbitrary code execution. Vulnerabilities are classified by severity based on several factors. The most critical vulnerabilities allow remote code execution, meaning an attacker can cause the victim's computer to execute attacker-controlled code simply by convincing the victim to visit a malicious website with no additional interaction required. Slightly less severe are vulnerabilities requiring user interaction beyond visiting a page, such as downloading and opening a file or clicking a specific element. Vulnerabilities that allow information disclosure, reading data that should be protected, or denial of service causing the browser to crash are generally considered less critical but still significant. The Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS, provides a standardized framework for rating vulnerability severity on a scale from 0 to 10. Scores above 9.0 are considered critical and demand immediate attention. Scores from 7.0 to 8.9 are high severity. Scores from 4.0 to 6.9 are medium. Below 4.0 are low severity. However, CVSS scores are somewhat abstract. The real-world risk depends on whether exploit code is publicly available, whether the vulnerability is being actively exploited in the wild, and how many users remain unpatched. A crucial distinction exists between theoretical vulnerabilities discovered by security researchers and actively exploited vulnerabilities being used by attackers in real attacks. Many vulnerabilities are discovered through security research programs, including bug bounty programs where companies pay researchers for responsibly disclosing flaws. These discoveries allow vendors to patch vulnerabilities before attackers discover them independently. However, attackers also discover vulnerabilities, and when they do, they may exploit them silently for weeks, months, or even years before the vulnerability becomes known to the vendor. These are called zero-day vulnerabilities, referring to the fact that the vendor has had 0 days to develop a patch before exploitation began. Web browsers have become the primary interface through which most people interact with the Internet, and consequently, they have become extraordinarily attractive targets for attackers. Understanding why requires examining what browsers access and what attackers can gain from compromising them. Modern browsers are credential vaults. They store hundreds of saved passwords for websites, email accounts, online banking, social media, shopping sites, and work systems. While these passwords are encrypted when stored locally, if an attacker achieves code execution within the browser process, they can potentially access the decryption mechanisms and extract passwords in plaintext. Even without extracting saved passwords, browsers maintain active session cookies for sites where users are currently logged in. Stealing these session tokens allows attackers to impersonate the user on those sites without needing passwords at all. Financial activity increasingly occurs through web browsers. Online banking, payment processing, cryptocurrency exchanges, investment platforms, all of these are accessed through browsers. Attackers who compromise browsers can inject malicious code into banking websites, capturing account numbers, transaction details, and authentication credentials. They can modify transaction amounts or destination accounts invisibly, redirecting funds to attacker-controlled accounts. The sophistication of modern banking trojans that operate through browser compromise is remarkable, with some capable of defeating two-factor authentication by intercepting one-time codes in real time during legitimate user sessions. Browsers contain extensive personal and behavioral data. Browsing history reveals interests, political views, health concerns, and private activities. Bookmarks and saved articles indicate what information users value. Search queries expose questions users are too embarrassed to ask publicly. Autofill data includes addresses, phone numbers, and potentially sensitive personal information. For attackers engaged in identity theft, corporate espionage, or blackmail, this data is extremely valuable.